Wonderful. So if you've got a Bible, with your Bible, could you open up to Acts chapter 16? We're going to look there. A fabulous story. We're talking about what do the words, the ways and the works of Jesus look like, and are they relevant for our lives? Yes, they are. And there's this wonderful story in Acts 16, and it's the moment when the gospel first comes to Europe. Lots of the world think the gospel came from Europe. This is the moment when the gospel goes to Europe for the very first time. And really, it's just sort of like early on in Paul's second missionary journey. That's like the fancy term for his this part of the Acts. And the first missionary journey was basically Barnabas training Paul how to make disciples like Jesus did. Yeah? And Paul was on a steep learning curve. And he's still on the learning curve. Second mission journey, he's leading his first ever team. So it's like we have this bird's eye view, up close view of watching Paul on a massively steep learning curve. Because the way he would go about making disciples with his natural leadership style would not be like how Jesus did it. The way Jesus went about it was this. Started at the beginning, went through the middle to get to the end. Paul's modus operandi was go hard or go home. Yeah? And like when he first went to his hometown after he'd become a Christian, he went hard and they wanted to not just go home, wanted him to go home. They wanted to kill him. He got excommunicated. He got whipped. It was going very, very badly. And the beautiful thing is that a man named Barnabas took him under his wing, and Barnabas started to train him and invest in him, and really discipled him like Jesus had discipled Barnabas. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Acts and wondered where Barnabas came from. Like, you know how like Barnabas and Stephen and Philip, like these absolute legends, sort of suddenly turn up in the book of Acts. It seems to me that we really, realistically, only have two options of where they came from. They either came from Mars, or they were part of what Luke chapter 10 calls the 72. Not the 12. But a slightly larger community, leadership community. Paul and Barnabas was in that, and I think Philip was in that, I think Stephen was in that. I think that's the natural reading of the New Testament, or alternatively, they came from Mars. I go for the not Mars option personally. And so you've got Barnabas taking Paul under his wing, known as Saul, and then starting to train him and teach him, this is what I've learned from Jesus. I want you to... And really, if you look at Acts 13 and 14, you'll see Paul learns the person of peace principle. He learns it. He tried to do it without the person of principle. Go hard or go home at the nearest unsuspecting victim. I think Paul, the only car he ever owned was a bulldozer. And it had no reverse. He just drove it over people. And so that's what brings us to Acts chapter 16, where Paul is still learning. I love it. He's leading the team, but he's still on a sharp learning curve. I love that. I think leaders need to keep learning our whole lives. That's what I think. No shame in that at all. In fact, there's wonderfulness in that, if wonderfulness is a word. But before we read the passage, I just want to tell you a story. I don't know if you've ever had the joy of leading someone to Jesus. It's a really good... I remember the first person of my friends who became a Christian and that I led to Christ was at university. I just become a Christian. His name was Albie. He's about 6'6". He's enormous. He's about 18 times bigger than me. And he was from country Victoria, and he was rough as anything, built like a brick dunny, like just a big guy. And anyway, we would pray for him, and he's in one of my courses, and we'd pray for him at our because I joined a Christian group because I'd just become a Christian. So what do you do at university? You're just a brand new Christian, go to a Christian group, and so I joined up, and we would pray at 6 a.m. on Tuesday mornings in the Monash University Religious Centre for a whole bunch of stuff. But we pray for our friends who didn't know Jesus, and Albie was one of them. And then Albie becomes a Christian. And I remember after a couple of weeks, he said, "Can I come to the prayer meeting?" It's like, totally, you can come to the prayer meeting. So you join us. And after a couple of months, there came this one morning where Albie, I'll never forget that morning. It was when Albie debuted in praying in public. Like he kept nice and quiet, but this was the morning where he was going to make. He'd obviously been listening and working up to this moment, but his debut moment of praying in public out loud. And I'll never forget what he prayed. He goes like, we're in our little circle, 6 a.m, it's dark outside, it's 6 a.m in our little circle, and he goes, "Oh Lord." And we're sitting going, "Oh, awesome. I hope he's going to pray." Oh, and he prays this, "Oh Lord, pour down your Spirit." And that's not bad. That's a good start off. And this was a Pentecostal group. So the theme was quite good. He'd obviously picked up the theme. Anyway, and of course he's praying, and it's the first time we're just going, awesome. So we all go, "Yes, Lord, which he clearly got very encouraged by because he kept praying. And then he goes, "Oh Lord, pour down your fire." And we're going, metaphor. That's awesome. Like, pour down your fire, excellent. And we're Pentecostals, so it's like fire's awesome. So, yes, Lord, pour down your fire. And he goes, "Oh, Lord, burn us." It's his debut. So we cut him a bit of slack. "Yes, Lord, burn us," in an extremely figurative sense. And then he prays this prayer. He goes, I kid you not, he goes, "Oh Lord, torture us." It's true. And we go, no, torture Albie, Lord, be nice to us. I'll tell you that story because actually for quite a few years after I finished university, that became an increasingly historic story. And it got a few months old, it got a few years old, it got a decade, it got well over a decade, a couple of decades since that story. And I felt like, I was drinking from the Kool-Aid of God's not at work, God can't use me. I was drinking deep from the Kool-Aid, and it's like, that's never going to happen again. I think the joy of my last 10 years has been stuff like that doesn't have to be live in our distant past if ever it happened. It can be a part of our current experience. And I said this morning that one of the key things that Jesus trained his guys in, and Barnabas would have been in this group, he said the harvest is ripe. The harvest is plentiful. The people are way more open to faith and life and purpose than we give them credit for. And sometimes we have the conversation with them and say no for them in our imagination. And of course, because they're not involved in the conversation, we come to the conclusion that they didn't really say anything in our conversation, did they? They weren't very open in our conversation that we were having for them in our imagination. It's so easy to buy in that. And it's like we're self-sabotaging from the get-go. I don't buy that line. If we'll care enough and be curious enough, we'll find that people are way more open than we think. And so these three simple things: the people who like you, listen to you and serve you. Not the logical people necessarily. Because people will surprise you. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being made in the image of God. People surprise us. And hopefully we surprise people. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about, as you identify people of peace, what next? What do I do? Because what I don't want us to just do is just go, oh wow, I've got a person of peace. And so what I want to talk about is having conversations, purposeful conversations, not manipulative conversations, not some toxic form of friendship evangelism where you just befriend people to convert them. I don't like that. That's inauthentic. It's manipulative. That's not what Jesus is. That's not how Jesus rolls. Yeah. But sometimes, because we don't want to be manipulative, we can settle for the status quo, and we can settle for being passive. And the The last thing that people who have the hope of Jesus Christ in their lives should be is passive. So again, God's at work. We don't have to make it happen. But what we've got to learn to do is not ignore what God is doing. What we've got to learn to do is identify what God is doing and join him and cooperate with what he's doing. Make sense? The default setting is love and serve everybody. Is that okay? It's not, well, you're not a person of peace, then I'm not going to have anything. It's not that. You love and serve everyone. One of my best mates, his name's Shane, is not a person of peace. He doesn't, because the 3 criteria, right? It's just, and again, it's not a label. It's just a handle to help me identify where God's at work. Does that make sense? It can change and shift over time, but with Shane, like me. Yeah, he doesn't just like me, he loves me. He loves me to death. Yeah. Serve me, he would do anything for me. I'm pretty sure he'd die for me if he had to. He's a great guy. He's one of my best mates. Listen? No. He talks too much to listen to me. Every time he's not talking, he's either drawing in breath to keep talking, or he's thinking of the next thing he's going to say and getting slightly annoyed that I'm talking. Doesn't make him a bad guy, but they're the 3 signs, and it's not one of the 3, it's all 3. They're the signs that turn up when God's at work with somebody. If that makes any sense. So we've got this wonderful story of Paul on the learning curve in Europe. If you think there are some geographic names here, and if you think it's amazing how I can pronounce all of them, I've learned how to pronounce all biblical names. Do you want a tip? Pronounce it however you want, but pronounce it confidently. And everybody will go, oh, shit, I thought it was... But seriously, they totally know their biblical names. Anaphalaphalaphalagus. Just say it confidently. Verse 11, from Troas. We put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. The next day we went on to Neapolis. See how confidently I said all those words? From there we travelled to Philippi, a Roman colony and a leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. It's fascinating. When Luke writes and uses the word stay, there's a particular word that in the original that he uses, and it's the word that Jesus uses in Luke chapter 10 with people of peace. When you find the person of peace, stay with them. And if you actually trace the use of that word through Luke's writings, he very, very often connects it with people of peace. Don't feel like you've got to save everybody. Find the people of peace. Love equally, but invest differently. Oh, verse 13, and I love this. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. Let me just push pause there. I don't know how you read these stories in the book of Acts, but we've sort of reflected on the Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and the loser strategy, where we read as if they're superheroes, they're the Avengers, and I'm a loser and could never do anything. And we can bring so much baggage into the book of Acts and read heaps of stuff in here. So what I love about this is, these guys, Paul's leading his team, one thing about all the people in his team is they're all Jewish. So all being Jewish people, on the most obvious day, in a city that has no synagogue, they go to a place of prayer. So they're not on holidays looking for a church service. They're looking for where people of peace might gather. The way I would describe that is they're looking for places of grace and favour and invitation. But what I love is what they're doing is not rocket science. On the most obvious day, they go to the most obvious place looking for where God might already be at work. Let me tell you, you can do that. You can find obvious times in obvious places to go looking for where God might be at work in people in your world. Like schools, like sporting clubs, like community groups, like neighbourhoods, like ministry and service areas. Where are people gathering? Because often where people are gathering, they're looking for community or they're looking for purpose. That to me is a sign. Maybe God might be at work with them and they don't even know it. So what I love is they roll up in Europe for the first time on an obvious day in an obvious place. And then it says this: we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. Again, I don't know if you read about Paul. I don't know what you think about Paul. Paul has an uneven reputation depending on what areas of the church you're in. Like, some people think he's a legend. Some people think he's an idiot. I think he's a good guy. I think he goes hard or goes home, and I think he's misunderstood sometimes, and probably does a fair job at contributing to people misunderstanding him. But sometimes what we think is, every time he walked up to anyone, he only ever spoke in 45-minute lectures and monologues. And we think, do you know what I mean? And we read all this stuff. Let me tell you, if he's making a speech, Luke's pretty happy to write it out word for word. So if we assume he's making a speech or a sermon everywhere he goes, I think we'll miss the normalness of what he's doing. Because what he does, everything about the language in verse 13, we sat down. I can do that. Can you? Well, you obviously can. He sat down and began to speak, literally started to have a conversation with. The language there is not lecture language, it's conversation language. Again, we can read the book of Acts and just go, oh, they're swanning in and the Holy Spirit just leads them like a dove and I couldn't possibly do any of that. You can. You can go to an obvious place with obvious people and sit down and start to talk with people. Yeah. I was sitting next to Kathy. Where's Kathy? Kathy. Two introverts at lunch, sitting down. You should have seen us. We're having a good old talk. That stuff that makes us come alive. Again, it's just being curious. Just want to hear people's stories. Everybody gets to play. And our conversation, I think, would have fitted in very comfortably in Acts chapter 16. Yeah. So they start a conversation. Can I say, the place where I'll get back to that and I'll just keep going for a second. Verse 14 says this. Now, one of those listening, like, listen and serve. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshipper of God. It's really important, I think, to understand that language, worshipper of God, doesn't mean she was a Christian. Paul's modus operandi wasn't helping Christians. It was taking the gospel to new territory. Not building on other people's foundations was his language around that. And so I think what Luke is doing is trying to describe somebody who God's already at work with, a person of peace, a worshipper of God. Sometimes they're called noble people or intelligent people. It's just language trying to come to terms with God's at work with somebody. Look for those people. What Luke does is doesn't give us the highlights reel of the book of Acts. He gives us the details he wants us to pay attention to. Yeah. And so there's this woman here. Now, interesting. In this group of women who Paul and his guys are having a chat with, one of them was listening. And again, this is fine because Paul's quite happy. He's just loving and serving everyone. He's loving equally, but he's looking for the people of peace. He's looking for the person of peace. And that person of peace's name here is Lydia. Now, what I love is key details. Seemingly slightly random, she's a dealer in purple cloth, which probably means she's a high-end fashion designer, if I was to put that in just normal language, which I find a fascinating detail for Luke to include, because Paul's trade, he's a tent maker, which means he works with leather of all kinds, in all sorts of ways, not just making tents for us to go camping in. I find it fascinating that Paul, sitting talking with this woman, one of the key details, not just where she's from in Turkey, Thyatira, but the other detail he includes is her trade, which overlaps with Paul's trade. I think the most natural reading of this passage is not that Paul delivered a sermon. I've got I'm writing this book called Romans. I'd love to just take you through it. No. He's just having a conversation. And I think what they do is they start talking shop. Talking about stuff that's common ground for both of them. And I find that helpful. Because what he does is he sits down, starts having a conversation. He starts where I think we need to be really ready to have spiritual conversations, and that's where we start, just having casual conversations with people. Don't disrespect casual conversations with people. They're not pretend conversations. They're starting out exploring conversations. They're finding out where people are at, where people are up, what kind of things do they want to share, what kind of things are they going to ask about, what are they curious about me about, casual. And what I think is really helpful here is when I start looking for people of peace, I look for them in the midst of casual conversations. Soccer practice, I've got out of the car, I've left the book at home, I've got out of the car, I'm standing by the side line with other guys. Do you know what I pay attention to? I pay attention to the people who remember my name. Because I'm not that memorable. That's what I've discovered in life. And actually, lots of people don't remember your name. If somebody remembers my name, it doesn't mean they're a person of peace, but it makes me pay attention to them. Or if we're starting to share just anecdotes, I say to them, I pay attention to who asks questions or remembers anecdotes. In the midst of casual conversation, I'm just paying attention to what are those relational cues that turn up again and again in people who God's already at work with. Not just about religious content. If that makes any sense? It's casual. And then there's this shift in the conversation he has with these women. He shifts from having a casual conversation to having a meaningful conversation. I think that's really important. That we can look for opportunities where God's at work and we're having casual conversations with people. Are there opportunities to move to meaningful conversations? And when I say meaningful conversations, I mean this: meaningful for them, not you. Somewhere along the line, us Christians, we look for opportunities like predators to get people to talk about our stuff. What do you think about Jesus? After you've just would you like a latte? And what do you think about Jesus? Now, I'm not saying don't mention Jesus, because the default setting is love and serve everyone and be conspicuously spiritual. But start at people's beginnings. This has been really important for us as a church to learn. What's meaningful for the people around us? What do I mean by that? What are people's interests? The people you work with? Your kids? What are their interests? What are their passions? And what are their stories? It's a privilege to hear people's stories that are more than just anecdotes that they would naturally share on social media and not be afraid to get cancelled. If they push from anecdotes to stories, that's people opening their lives to us. We need to pay attention to that, because it's as we build trust with people and people build trust with us that we will find opportunities to partner with people and help them discover Jesus for themselves. So I love this. Everything that Paul's doing here, it's just not rocket science. I can sit down with people. I can pay attention to the cues. Who likes, listens and serves. Now, one of them, I could pick one person. He'd just come off the previous chapter, a whole lot of nothing. So it's not like everybody just throws themselves down in front of him. But he keeps going. He's just looking for the people of peace. So casual, meaningful conversations into meaningful conversations. And then this, at the end of verse 14, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. Isn't that fabulous? God is leading this process, not Paul. The journey keeps going because God is at work, not because Paul is some guru. The Lord opened her heart. And literally, to what Paul was saying, as opposed to his sermon. We said the word message. It must have been a sermon. Poor Paul. Paul misunderstood Paul. But the Lord opened a heart. And for me, that almost reflects a third shift. Casual conversation to meaningful conversation to spiritual conversation. And for me, spiritual conversation is about three things: faith, values, and purpose. And when I'm having a conversation like that with somebody, I'm not fussed about what their faith is, because I want to find out. Because we're all designed for faith. We're all designed for faith. Values. What are the values that we want to live by or that we aspire to? I want to find out about those with people. And purpose. What are people's sense of purpose? And what I love here is casual conversation, meaningful conversation, spiritual conversation. And I use that word conversation because it's driven not by having great things to say, but asking better questions. I think one of the greatest things that we need to develop as people who follow Jesus is the lifelong pursuit of asking better questions. And again, oh no, I don't know what a better question is. I've got an answer. And it's not rocket science. You're going to be deeply disappointed by my definition. Three things for better questions. They can't be answered with yes. They can't be answered with no. And they don't start with the word why. Because why very often feels, especially when you're in the area of faith and values and purpose, very, very often feels like an accusation. So tell me about it. It's the same as why, but why feels like an accusation. Why did you do that? Can feel like an accusation. And often with people, faith, values and purpose, not in a crisis, is actually often new territory for people. And so you want to walk helpfully with them into that territory. And then verse 15. When she and the members of her household were baptised, she invited us to her home. Hello. People of service, yeah. People of peace, alert, alert, alert. I love Luke. He drops Easter eggs regularly into his writings, going, hello, person of peace, alert, alert. When she and her members of her household were baptised. Interestingly, she wasn't a convert, she was a disciple. She'd been discipled towards faith and to live by faith because she's not only getting baptised, she's passing things on to her household, to her network. That would be people that she's both related to and not related to, her extended family around her. It's fascinating, isn't it? And then she says this, I love this phrase, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. Which sounds like passive-aggressive, doesn't it? Emotional blackmail. If I'm really a Christian, Paul, that's not what she's doing. She's talking back to what he's been talking to her. Because people who have faith in Jesus, people who are people of peace, they offer hospitality. And what do you do when someone offers hospitality or offers to serve? You accept their offers of hospitality and service. In fact, can I say this on that one point? The number one mistake I've seen over 10 years of people with people of peace, the number one mistake I've seen is this: we don't let people serve us. Oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. Sarah and me, when we were learning this together, so we had to be deliberate. We had a signal, which, because we're both predisposed to say, no, don't worry, just don't inconvenience yourself, it's fine. We had a signal. If we one or the other saw us saying no to a person of peace's offer, we had a signal. Do you want to see the signal? It was initially designed because Sarah was going to do it to me, really. I wasn't really expecting her ever to do it to. She got called one night by one of the people of peace in our neighbourhood, who had three months previous just had her 7th child. Awesome. But she's ringing up and she says, oh, Sarah, I've just been thinking about you today. Oh, I just know you guys are just so, you must be just so busy, and would it be okay if I just brought around some hot dinner for you? Because you just must be really, really busy. And Sarah's going, what's she saying? To the mother of 7 children. No. Do you know what I'm doing? And Sarah's going, no, that would be lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Meredith. I kid you not, 3 hours later, we had 3 evening meals left on our doorstep. So even if you don't like the strategy, it's a free food. Just free. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And she left them there because she didn't want to interrupt us because we must be busy. It's not rocket science to say yes to someone who's offering. But you've got to understand, you've got to learn and wrestle with the idea. People are more open and God is more at work than you give him credit for or you give them credit for. And if you spend time talking yourself out of it or talking them out of it without even engaging with them, please stop. I know you mean well. But if you will learn to wrestle around, the money back guarantee stands. It's a wonderful, wonderful story here. Casual, meaningful to spiritual. There's actually one more thing that I think is quite helpful here, because clearly Paul then takes another step with her that leads to their conversation around staying and being baptised. But clearly he's led her into a space where he's helped her discover Jesus for herself. So four types of conversations. Casual conversations. And if God's at work, if he's not, that's cool. That's totally cool. Just relax. But if he is at work, maybe look for opportunities to move to meaningful conversations. What are their passions? One of the great stories I ask parents and it's not a line, it's just a helpful story because people seem to like answering it. One question I ask is, as a parent, I hope you don't mind me asking, but as a parent, what would be 2 or 3 of your greatest strengths? And if I ask that question, generally every time, or almost every time, people look 15% awkward and 85% I really want to talk about my strengths, because nobody ever asks about my strengths except in a job interview when it feels like a trick question. But people have strengths they can't even talk about in life. So casual to meaningful. And then if God's at work and it's a two-way street, are there opportunities to move to spiritual conversations? What do they think about faith? What's their faith? Because they've got some. Values. What do they aspire to? What are their hopes? And purpose. Beyond themselves. Everybody wants to live for that. Just authentically finding out. Because you can't disciple somebody anywhere if you don't know what makes them tick. Just looking, authentically curious, conspicuously spiritual. I'm not delaying talking about Jesus. I'm trying to be obvious and not annoying. So casual, meaningful, spiritual, and then I look for opportunities, if they arise, to ask a question, to move a conversation to discovery. To actually be really intentional now in helping somebody discover Jesus for themselves. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about tomorrow morning. We have got a very simple, in our church community, and we do this, we offer this and help other churches be able to work with this. But a very simple thing called Discovery Bible Method. It's the simplest way I know to disciple somebody towards faith in Jesus that lets the Word of God and the Spirit of God do the work, not me. Where my expert knowledge is not the key, if ever it was. If that's not a myth, I don't know what is. But it lets the Word of God and the Spirit of God do the work. So my aunt, my 80-year-old aunt, she still thought Jesus was like the Easter Bunny and Karl Marx. When I asked her, I said, I'm looking for someone to read the Bible with. I don't know whether you'd be interested. She said yes. I remember the first friend that I ever asked to read the Bible with me, his name is Mark. And one of those people who you haven't seen him for ages, and then when you catch up, it's like old times, like straight away. He's like that. And I remember we went to a local Thai restaurant just around the corner from my place. We were eating dinner. And then, I talk about people. It just hadn't even occurred to me that he might be a person of peace. Hadn't seen him that much, but I'm going, oh my goodness, I wonder if he's a person of peace. So I'm literally going, we get to the end of dinner, I'm thinking like this, internal conversation. Like, does he like me? Absolutely he likes me. Does he listen to me? Absolutely. We've been talking back and forward. Like, I've been talking about stuff, he's been talking about stuff back and forth. Totally. And then I kid you not, I go, but does he serve me? At that moment, he says, oh, Tim, do you want me to pay for tonight? And I went, yes. And then I went, on the inside, I went, oh, wow, he's a person of peace. And then I went, oh, no, he's a person of peace. And I think it would actually make it's a risk, but I think I could ask him to read the Bible with me. And I think he might even say yes. And then I went, it's like a Thai restaurant, like with mood lighting. And I'm sitting across the road, across the table from Mark, and suddenly I'm going, in these moments when panic starts to happen and you start to overthink things? So I'm in mid-overthink and I'm going, oh no, I wonder if people watching us are thinking I'm going to propose to you. and then we're quite close to church and I'm going, I wonder if there are people from Crossway who think that Pastor Tim is going to propose to Mark. Fortunately, I have a panic question at that point when I'm overthinking everything. And that's the question is, I'm looking for someone to read the Bible with. I don't know whether you'd be interested. And I asked Mark, and he said yes. And I tell you, I would have said to you 7, 8, 9 years ago, the Australians are closed. And that the dumbest question you could possibly ask someone in Australia is, who's not a Christian, I'm looking for someone to read the Bible with. I don't know whether you'd be interested. I mean, are you smoking? Are you on drugs? Like, what are you asking such an idiotic question for? But if they're a person of peace, and there's trust both ways, and an authentic friendship, people might just surprise you. So casual, meaningful spiritual discovery conversations. And what I found is this, and I'll finish with this thought. I generally find when I'm in one of those spaces, it's actually quite easy. Like once I'm in casual conversation, it's not hard to talk about casual stuff. Once I'm in meaningful conversations, it's actually quite straightforward to have them. When I'm in spiritual conversations, it's quite simple. And when I'm actually reading the Bible with someone, doing Discovery Bible Method with them, it's actually not that hard. The tension point is always moving from one to the other. It's always the tension point. What do I say? What will they say? Oh no, oh no, oh no. Here's the thing I've discovered. You cannot get rid of the pressure point. The move from one to the other, there is pressure at that point. What you have to do is use the pressure for good, not for evil. The pressure, using it for letting it be used for evil in your life will do one of two things. You'll either always back off and be passive, or you'll try to think of something better to say. Don't let the pressure do that to you. Instead, let the pressure cause you to ask a question. Just a follow-up question. A question that can't be answered with yes or no. Have a try. Explore. See what questions suit you when you ask them, or maybe that are helpful for people, and just bank them. Not to roll them out, but just to be able to have these kinds of conversations with people and learn what it is to disciple people towards faith. Is that all right, my friends? Excellent. Casual, meaningful, spiritual discovery conversation. Driven just by asking authentic, curious questions.